Imagine waking up, grabbing a water, opening your laptop, checking Twitter, and boom, your app's database has been leaked. And someone just DM'd you saying, hey bro, your app is hacked. But wait, I used best practices, right? I used server components, which means everything happens on the server. Right? But don't worry, in this video I will show you exactly how to fix these issues, how to keep your secrets safe, and how to secure your Next.js application like a pro. And I will show you why you need a data access layer. Sounds fancy, right? So now, without any further ado, how about we roll the video? Let's go! So right here I have created a little project, and as you see in the nav bar I have two links. That's because I will show you two mistakes which you probably do in your Next.js application. And then on the right side we also have a sign in and sign up button, but we will come to that a bit later on. Let's first of all get started with example number 1, and this example deals with leaking secrets, which you want to never do. So let's look at the code example. This is our page.tsx for our example 1. We have an export default function, we return a card, and I guess that's quite standard stuff. There's no problem with this code itself, everything is safe. But let's imagine the following. Inside of here we want to fetch some sort of data from Stripe and then do some sort of mutation. What most of you will do is probably first of all initialize Stripe in a new file, like for example get.env.ts. This is a file which I've created in the lib folder, and inside of here I just export a function. This is asynchronous, and then we have a constant Stripe secret key with a very secret value. Also, I have a comment which says, hey, do something with the Stripe secret key. Now, if you look at this code, does it look incorrect to you? Does it look unsafe? Probably most people would say no, it looks quite alright. And at first glance, it is alright. If I now go back to my page.tsx and do a constant, env, get env, I will also have to import it, nothing will break, everything will still be fine, because if I save this and go back and do a hard refresh, nothing breaks. And that's because this page.tsx is a server component, meaning everything runs on the server side. We don't leak anything to the client side. So where's the problem? Well, let's imagine the following. Let's say you work in a team with multiple engineers, and now one engineer wants to convert this component to a use client component for reason XYZ. Maybe he wants to use the use state hook or something. He will convert it to use client, save it, go back, and as you see, we don't have any errors, no pop-ups, and this developer will just save it and git push it to your repo. What's the problem? Well, he is currently leaking secrets. Let me show it to you. You can go to your inspector, then in the inspector we can go to our sources. In our sources we can go to next static, to our chunks, to the app folder, and then to the page.tsx. This is our code, and let me also make it a bit bigger for you guys. And inside of here I can now search for certain things. Let's again go back. We had a secret, super secret, damn don't leak. What is if I copy it and paste it inside of here? What is this? Super secret, damn don't leak? Did I just leak my secret? I have my constant Stripe secret equals to my secret key. That's not what should happen. Because if I again go back to the page.tsx and delete the use client and do a hard refresh, I won't find it. And that's because this is a server component. But if I mark it as a use client component, I can again find my super secret damn don't leak. Damn, that's a huge issue, because developers can sometimes be a bit lazy, a bit stupid, and such issues, such problems can happen very quickly. So now the question comes, how can I throw an error? How can I notify a developer that he shouldn't do this? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to have secrets which are leaked to the client side. Well, fix number 1 is, instead of storing your secrets in plain text and in some sort of function, you want to always store them in an env file. Now, most people do it, but sometimes small mistakes like this happen and they have devastating results. So please go to your env file and create some sort of Stripe secret key and paste it inside of here. Then in the get.env file, we can now do an process.env.stripe secret key. And if I save this and go back and still leave it as use client and do a hard refresh, then we can go to our inspector, to our sources, to our chunks. Let's make it a bit bigger. In the chunks to the app folder, then the page.tsx. And if inside of here, I now search for my super secret key, so I will just copy the name. It was Stripe secret key. And if I paste it inside of here, we now have the Stripe secret key, but then we have our environment variable. This means we still have a client component, but we don't leak anything. But now you might say, okay, we don't leak anything, but I still don't want to allow a developer to, at the end of the day, invoke the function from the client side. How can I prevent that? Well, there's a simple fix. Inside of our getenv function file, we can import something. We can do an import server only. Server only is already installed when you create a brand new Next.js project. And this says in very simple terms that this function shouldn't be or is not allowed to be invoked from a client component. This means if I save this and go back and do a hard refresh, we get an error. You are importing a component that needs server only. This only works in a server component. Now quickly, what's the difference between server only and use server? Because I think a lot of people are confused right now. So use server at the end of the day creates a server action. This means it takes the function and converts it to a server action, and a server action is just a function which runs on the server side and at the same time creates a public endpoint. Server only does not convert your function or do anything. It only says, hey, this function should only and is only allowed to be invoked from a server component. A server action is allowed to be invoked from the client side, from a client component. That's why we want to mark it as import server only. And now we first of all make sure that the secret key is always, let's say, on the server side. And we also make sure that this component, the function, is only called inside of a server component. This means if I delete use client, this whole error goes away and everything again works as expected. Let's now continue with example number 2. And inside of here, you see a lot of users. That's because I fetch user data, meaning we have a username, contact details, company address. And whenever you fetch user data, it probably means that it's very sensitive data, that it's very private data. In this example, I want to only allow authenticated users to view this data. This means if I go back to my code example, we have our export default function, and inside of here I fetch data from JSON placeholder. This is just a dummy API which returns some users with some data for the users. Then I just await my data and then I map over the data and render cards for the individual users. So again, if I go back, you see one card for one user. So let's again go back to my first question. How can we make sure that only authenticated users are able to view this data? Well, most of you would probably say something like this. How about we go above our fetch call and inside of here we do some sort of fetching. We will say, hey, let's get our user. And once we have the user, you would probably do some sort of if check and say, hey, if there's no user, then let's redirect back to login or to the index page, whatever. So this is what probably most of you would do. And at first glance, this seems fine. And it is at first glance. But the bigger your project becomes, the bigger of a problem this will create. So what we'll do right now is we will first of all implement authentication. Then I will show you this auth check where we will just get the user and do an if check inside of this file. I will show you the problem which we will have with that, and then we will create a data access layer, this fancy term. So let's first of all start with authentication. For authentication, we will use Kind, the sponsor of this video and my favorite auth solution. Now Kind offers both authentication and authorization, as well as a few other features like for example feature flags, and soon they will also offer billing, which will allow you to implement billing with ease. Now you know what Kind is, which means I guess we can get started with implementing it in our project. So we will do a little speed run and I will implement authentication in 1 minute or so. Step number 1, sign in. Once signed in, I want to create a new business. So let me go to switch business and then I want to add a new business. Then we want to add a business name, kind domain, number of employees, and region. Then I can save this. Now my project has been created. I can click on the link to open my business. Now we have a little onboarding guide. So I want to use kind with my existing code base. Then I want to use Next.js. Then for authentication, I want to use email, Google, and let's also use GitHub. Let's continue. And now we want to also connect our code base. So let's click on connect. And the first step is to install the SDK. So let's copy this. I want to open my terminal and I can install it inside of here. Once installed, I will restart my dev server. Then the next step is to copy these environment variables and paste them in our env file. Inside of here, we store the client ID, client secret, issue URL, a few other things, and also the post logout and login redirect URL. So when the user logs in, I want to redirect the user to /example2. Then the next step is to create an API route, or in other words, a route handler. I will copy this route structure. I can go back, I can open the Explorer, then in the app folder, I can create a new file and paste it inside of here. And then I can copy this code and paste it inside of here. This route handler allows us to interact with kind, meaning it allows us to log in, log out, and stuff like that. And now there's one more thing missing, and that's our auth provider. This will give us access to the kind of data in our application, and this will ensure that the tokens are refreshed when needed. So I can copy the code, paste it inside of here. Then I want to also give my children a type, and this will be of type React Node. And then I can open my layout file, and I want to wrap everything, meaning the whole HTML, in my auth provider. So now we are finished with the back end, and now we can use the register link and login link to redirect the user to sign in or sign up. So I want to open my navbar, and inside of here I can first of all paste the import statement for the register link and login link. And instead of using the link component for sign in and sign up, we want to now use the register link and login link. These components are headless, so let's add a class name of button variants. And if I go back and do a hard refresh, we should be able to sign up. So I will click on sign up, and now I will get redirected to kind. Inside of here, I can sign up either with Google, GitHub, or with my email. Let's continue with Google. As you now see, I got redirected, and in theory, I should have a valid session, but we still show a sign in and sign up button. Let's fix that. So let's go to the navbar, and inside of here, I want to get my user session. So we can do a constant, I can destructure it, and then this will be equal to the get kind server session hook. Inside of here, I can destructure a function, which is called get user. I want to now fetch my user, so I can do a constant user equals to await get user. And let's mark the function as async. And instead of now rendering a login link and register link, we can now create an ternary, and we will check the following. If we have a user, then let's return a logout link. If not, then let's return our login and register link. If I save this and again go back, you will see that we now render my name, and then we have the sign out button. Okay, great. So now authentication fully works, and if I go back to my page.tsx, we can now fetch our user and check if the user is authenticated. So let's again do a constant. I will destructure this, and this will be equal to get kind server session. Then where I destructured, I can get an is authenticated state. This is in Boolean. We want to now fetch this, so I will do a constant authenticated. This will be equal to await is authenticated, and let's do an if statement. If the user is not authenticated, let's redirect the user to /API/auth/register. If I now save this and go back and do a hard refresh, everything still works. That's because I have a valid session. But if I copy the URL and open it in a new incognito tab, I will get redirected to the kind authentication page. Nice. So where exactly is the problem inside of here, you might say? We now check that the user has a valid session, and if not, we redirect the user to register. Good question. So when you think about React, what's the first thing which comes to your mind? Probably reusability. So React has a very big focus on reusable components. You create one component and render it in multiple places. Now let's imagine we want to render these user cards in multiple places. In this example 2 route, in some sort of settings route, in some sort of private route. And if this is the case, we want to probably create a separate component. So I can go to my components, to the web folder, and inside of here, I will just create an users table.tsx file. I can now paste the whole code inside of here in the users table, but let me delete this as authenticated check. We want to just fetch our data. And if I go back to my example 2 route, I can delete everything in the return statement and I want to just call my users table. I will import this and I can also delete the fetch call since we don't need it anymore. So inside of here, we now only have an async function. We get our user session. We check if the user is authenticated. If not, we will redirect the user. And if the user has an valid session, we will render our user table. In the user table, we fetch the data and then we render it. If I go back and do a hard refresh, everything still works. If I copy the URL and open it in a new incognito tab, everything still works, meaning I will get redirected to kind. This is nice. But now let's imagine the following. I take the user table component and I render it in the page.tsx. So underneath the card, I will just render my users table. This is self-closing. And if I save this and go back to example 1, I now render my cards. But here's the thing. Inside of here, I don't check if the user is authenticated. Meaning if I copy the URL and open it in a new incognito tab, everything still renders inside of here. But now you might say, hey Jan, just don't make your life so hard. There's an easy fix. Go back to the users table. So I will just open the users table, go above your fetch call, again get the user session. And then once you have the user session, how about you again do an if check? That's probably what you think right now. And you know what? I guess this works, but this is not what the Next.js team recommends. So if you go to the documentation or to the blog, you'll see something which is called data access layer. And this is in the blog article which talks about security in Next.js. And they mention right here, our recommended approach for new projects is to create a separate data access layer in your JavaScript codebase and consolidate all data access inside of there. Okay, I guess what do they really mean? Good question. So what they mean at the end of the day is that you want to create a separate file, multiple separate files or one separate file and consolidate all of your query logic, all of your data access logic in this one separate file or in multiple separate files. So let me show you an example. Let's go to our app folder and inside of here I will create a new folder. This will be the data folder and inside of here we will now consolidate all of our query logic, all of our data access logic. So I will create another folder and this will be the user folder. A few people might also just create one file. As mentioned, this is fine, but I like to create multiple folders depending on the specific model, if this makes sense, depending on the database schema. So we now have our user and inside of here I want to do a few things. For example, I want to get one specific user. So I will create a file get user.ts. Then I want to create or get multiple users. So I would do an get-users.ts. And then maybe I want to also have another function which checks if the user is authenticated. So I would create a new file and I would name it require-user.ts. So now we have a new data access layer and inside of here we have all of our query logic. This means if I go to my users table, I can first of all delete the authentication check. I don't need it. And I can copy this constant response await fetch, meaning I can just copy my fetch call. Then I can go to my get users. Let's do an export async function. This will be called get users. I can open it and inside of here I can now create my query logic, meaning I can again get my users from the JSON placeholder API. I can now copy the name, get users, I can go to my users table and instead of now doing this constant result equals to await fetch, blah blah blah, I can just delete this and we will do inside of here instead and constant data equals to await get users. I can import that from my data access layer, and now we are finished. But the core problem still isn't fixed, because if I do a hard refresh, you see I still get my data. And that's because we don't do any authorization checks. This means what we can now do is we can go back to our data layer. Then in the data layer, we have our user folder. And in the user folder, let's go to our get user. Inside of here, we can do an export async function get user. In the get user function, I want you first of all, again, get the get kind server session hook. Then we get our get user function. This function has to be fetched. So let's do a constant user equals to await get user. And now we have our user. But this function still does not guarantee us that the user is authenticated. This means we can now go to require user, our next function or file. Let's do an export async function require user. We can now call get user from our data access layer, and we can do an if check, and we will say, hey, if we don't get a user, then let's redirect the user to register. And since we now have our require user function, we can go back to get users, and above our constant response equals to await fetch, we can just call await require user. I have to invoke it, import it from my data layer, and voila, we are finished. If I now save this and go back and do a hard refresh, you see I still see my data. That's because I'm authenticated. If I copy the URL and open it in a new incognito tab, I will get redirected to authenticate. Now let's again talk about the benefit, because some people might again say, hey Jan, I mean at the end of the day I can create the same logic in the users table function. That's true, this is fine, it works. But at the end of the day you're kinda trading, let's say, ease, because it's easier, let's be honest. You're trading ease against scalable, maintainable, and clean architecture. That's why you want to always create a data access layer. And this is not some new concept. This concept also exists in PHP, Java. They are called a bit differently, but the concept is the same for almost every framework. You want to have one layer for all of your data. You want to have one layer for all of your mutations. This means, for example, if you use server actions, I would go in the app folder, create one separate actions file, and inside of here, I would create all of my server actions. So then we would have one query layer, one data layer. This is the data folder. Then we would have one mutation layer in the actions file. And with that, we at the end of the day just separate all of our concerns. Our page.tsx renders our UI. Our data layer at the end of the day creates all of the query logic, and our actions file stores all of our mutation logic. So with that, we separate all of our concerns. And this is also a big benefit if you work in a big team, because one team would work on the UI, the other team would work on the query logic, and the other team at the end of the day would work on the mutation logic in the actions file. And one thing which I would also do is inside of our data layer on top, I would always import server only. So we can do an import server only, and with that we just guarantee that this function is only callable from the server side. So with that we take all of our learnings and create clean architecture. So let's now summarize again everything. If you use secrets, you want to always store them in an env file. Once they are stored in an env file, also consider marking the component, the file, with server only or import server only. With this, you make sure that this function is only callable from the server side. Secondly, whenever you fetch data, you want to create a data access layer. This creates clean architecture, clean code, but it's also easier to maintain because you separate your concerns. It's also easier to authorize everything. As you see, we have our authorize function, require user, and we can call it inside all of our other functions. In get users, we can also in theory do it in get user, and then let's say we would have inside of our data another model, like for example block, and inside of here we would create another file get-block.ts, and then I would do an export async function get a block, and above this constant response, we could again do an await require user. So this is the data access layer, a super important concept which sounds relatively complex when you first hear it, but it's super easy to implement. So at the end of the day, please take this best practice and implement it in your project. This is something which I will also do for all of my further projects, because in my past videos I just fetched my data inside of my components. This is fine to do so, but it isn't a best practice, and we want to implement best practices, so that's why we want to use the data access layer. And since we're now finished with this video, I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me and my heart, so please do it. Thank you, Kind, for making this video possible. Please don't forget to check out Kind, first link in the YouTube description. And now, I hope I can see you in the next video. And yeah, enjoy your day and bye! To-do, grab a Tic Tac, my friend, and maybe drink some water. Also super important. How about, what do you think about the t-shirt? Looks cool, right? It's a Kind t-shirt. I think they should create a merch shop. What do you think? Maybe I should ask someone at Kind to do that. Maybe I should create one. You know what? Maybe I should create a video where we create an e-commerce store for Kind products. I will think about that. But now, enjoy your day and bye.